All tutoring and mentoring, I mean, it's pretty similar. You get to connect with kids and really help out in ways that, like, aren't even quantifiable, helping with their confidence, helping with all of that. So I will pass the floor over to Jen, who can tell you a bit more about just the basics of volunteering, whether you're at Northstar, whether you're at McFarland, or anywhere else, some skills and tricks that you can use when working with kids.
All right. So just a super quick history of North Star. North Star Tutoring has been around for over 30 years. Until a few years ago, we were mostly in Columbia Heights, but recently we've expanded as far as Hyattsville. We're opening another site in PG County. We'll be in a couple other wards starting this fall. Um, but really, throughout all of our history, the program has really maintained the same structure with which is one-on-one tutoring and mentoring. So any volunteers who sign up with us get matched with their own student that they will work with for the full school year and ideally years after if both continue in the program. And then in addition to those tutoring sessions, we encourage our volunteers to take their student on a mentoring outing maybe once a month. In terms of locations, we have our original site, which is at the Mount Pleasant Library. We also have a Hyattsville Teen Center program that Tony has been volunteering at for a few years. Maybe he can share a few things during the question period about that. And then we're opening up in 4 new sites in the fall. One at Hyattsville Middle. One is a new partnership with Sasha Bruce, where we'll be working with formerly incarcerated students. Another is at Oxon Hill Middle School in PG County. And then the last is at Center City Charter School. So we're really excited to be in kind of a period of growth right now. Okay, why become a tutor? The most obvious thing is to help your student academically. That's the first thing most people think of when they become a tutor. Um, I'm sure you've heard if you're on Tom's mailing list about the great need for tutors in the city, both math and reading. Obviously, that's a huge part of what we do is helping students reach grade level in both subjects. You might volunteer at a place that kind of focuses on all subjects. North Star is a little bit geared more towards math and reading. Um, but you might sign up for a program that does homework help, and they'll sort of be materials across the board that you're working on with your student. At North Star, we do students in grades K through 12. Probably about 20% of them are in high school, and then 40% elementary, 40% in junior high. Boost your students' academic confidence. This is a really big one that they sort of, McFarland, I think, touched on it a little bit a minute ago. I think such a big part of learning, particularly when you're talking about math and reading, is just confidence. I had a student 2 years ago in Hyattsville, and it was her first night with us. I didn't have a tutor for her, so I worked with her myself. And her mom had called me beforehand to say, my student really needs help with math. She's so bad at math. We really have to focus on math. When she brought her in, she kind of reiterated the same thing. I could tell her daughter felt uncomfortable, looked a little embarrassed. So when we started working together, I said, okay, why don't we pull out your math and see what we can do? And she just looked really upset and kept saying, like, no, I don't want to do it. I'm not good at math. We said, okay, well, why don't we just do a couple problems and then, we can play whatever game you want. So she did about 5 problems and she did them perfectly. She didn't make any mistakes. But every time she wrote down an answer, she would kind of look at me really nervously, like, is this right? Am I messing up? Kind of like waiting for correction, really. And it kind of made me realize she wasn't bad at math at all. Like, I don't know who had told her she was bad at math, if she just always felt like she couldn't do it. But it turned out the case was more she was so scared to do it that she wasn't turning in any of her homework. So she was getting a pretty bad math grade because she wasn't doing the work, but she knew how to do everything. And it was really just an issue of building up her confidence, making her feel comfortable. Um, and really, that's so much of math and reading is just boosting their confidence. Sharing maybe a story from your past, like if you weren't always good at math or reading and kind of connecting on that level, that can be really helpful too. Which actually goes to our next point is making a connection with your student. Um, since North Star is kindergarten through 12th grade, we've had tutors start with their student in kindergarten and move all the way through their academic career until the student graduates high school, which is obviously amazing to see. You might be in a program that isn't K through 12, or things come up, people move. You definitely don't have to make a 12-year commitment if you sign up for any of these programs. But it can be a really rewarding experience to see your student as they're growing academically. I have other students who stay in contact with their tutors even once they go to college and maybe do an internship at their place of employment, or they'll still send their tutor their college papers and ask if they can look over their paper before submitting them. So it's definitely a very meaningful relationship both for you and the student. And ideally, you'll be in a program that sort of fosters that relationship. And it's not, I haven't heard of any programs out there that just want it to be strictly educational. Obviously, that's the main focus, but I think most programs out there really encourage a good relationship between you and your student. So these are just some really general guidelines for your first night of tutoring. Your program could be really different, but I think these should generally apply to most places. The most important thing is checking that your volunteer clearance has come through. From what Tom and some of the McFarland staff were saying, it sounds like DCPS background checks are very easy right now, which is fantastic. They sent me to do my fingerprinting at a local 7-Eleven. I'm not really sure why, but it's not just UPS stores that are doing them. They have machines all over the city. Um, One thing I wanted to flag, if you do have a DCPS clearance, it's only good for 2 years. So just double check if you got it a little while ago that you're still cleared. If you are working or tutoring at a school, they'll definitely require you to do that background check. If you are working with another nonprofit that's not in a school, they might have you do a different background check. We use Sterling for ours. Different places will use a different process. Just make sure that you are definitely cleared before showing up the first night, or they might send you. Um, Review program information, obviously just, days, times. I can't tell you how many times people get the days mixed up on the first night. So just making sure you have kind of everything that you need, maybe the contact number in your phone for the program manager in case you're running late, really just general stuff. And then asking for your students' information. We like to give this out beforehand. So with North Star, we'll send a new tutor a little blurb about the student they'll be working with. Sometimes we don't know that much about the student ahead of time. So it could be as simple as, hey, you're working with a fifth grader named Brian. He has a sister in the program and his mom seems nice. And that's kind of like all I have to go off of. But if the student's been in the program for longer, we do like to give a longer um, paragraph or two about the student ahead of time. If your program doesn't do that for you, you can always ask. I mean, no one wants to just, if this is your first time tutoring, it can be a little bit intimidating to go in on the first night. So there's definitely nothing wrong with asking for a little bit of info on who you'll be working with. They might not know, but it never hurts to ask. And then at the first session, um, certainly with North Star, the first night of each program each year is very, very hectic. Obviously, if you're starting partway through the year, you might have a little bit of a quieter night. But I would just say it'll probably be really hectic. You might get there and not meet your student for 15 or 20 minutes. A lot of times it'll be one program coordinator trying to manage 50 kids and 50 students, and it can be chaos. But I promise they're trying really hard to keep everything coordinated. And then as far as working with your student, I think the most important thing the first night is just keeping your expectations reasonable. I think anything could be considered a win if you have a conversation with your student, if you find out 2 or 3 facts about them. You definitely I wouldn't expect to make any progress academically that first night. You never know what the student is going through at home or school or what their other experiences with adults have been, so they might be a little withdrawn or shy, or not. Sometimes we have kids who will sit down and just tell you their life story the first night, which is great in its own way. But a lot of times they're a bit reserved. They might kind of keep it to one word answers so they get to know you a little bit better. But I would just say, as long as you keep your expectations reasonable and really try to look at it as a win if you can connect on anything. And I mean literally anything. It could be you like the sneakers they're wearing and you talk about that for a minute. You both have purple on, you both hate math. It can be anything, just some little thing that you can kind of start a dialogue in is great. It does not have to be academic. I think another good way of getting the ball rolling is maybe sharing a few facts about yourself. Maybe the student isn't up for sharing their own information yet, but it can sort of build a connection if you tell them a few things about yourself, even if they don't ask. It can be something silly, it can be where you work, where you went to school, really anything. Just something to kind of get the ball rolling. You're another adult in their life that cares about them. A lot of our families, parents are great. They're really involved as much as they can be, but they might be working 2 jobs, or your student might be one of 4 siblings, and they don't always have that, like, full attention of an adult for 90 minutes is such a treat for them. Um, I feel like they definitely and that's sort of how I noticed they bond with their tutors pretty quickly, and I think it is because of that one-on-one attention. So, just a couple other little bits. Ideally, you'll be working with a school that will connect you to your students' teachers. That's sort of the best way of being able to find out what your student needs to work on, if they have any special accommodations they need. If you aren't connected to the teacher, I would definitely ask. You can ask the school to connect you, you can ask your students' parents to connect you. You won't always get a response from the teacher, but it's really helpful to have that communication ongoing with the teacher throughout the year. Which also with the program coordinators, you can loop them in as well. I know at Northstar we like to be included just so everyone's still on the same page, but it's really helpful as much as possible to kind of get teachers on board. And then imperfections of programming, there's a number of things that can go wrong. In the past, we've had issues with attendance. Sometimes your student doesn't show up for a few weeks. That can obviously be really frustrating. Your program will probably have different requirements for student absences. We only allow 3 per semester just to keep that consistency. Obviously, we don't want tutors showing up and the student isn't there. I think that was generally that and any behavioral issues, which obviously you'll be the first one to sort of see any behavioral issues. At Northstar, we encourage tutors to go right to the program managers. We don't want tutors to have to be the ultimate disciplinarian. Obviously, if you're comfortable, being firm and saying, "Hey, we got to get back to work," kind of redirecting them. But if you have any serious behavior issues, you should definitely talk to the staff member. And these are just general guidelines that we use at Northstar. I assume most programs would be pretty similar. For tutor expectations, we definitely encourage communication between tutors and parents. You can exchange phone numbers as early as the first week of working together. We just ask that you don't see your student outside of tutoring for the first 5 weeks. And that's just to give you guys time to get to know each other, to make sure everyone feels comfortable with one another. And at that point, you are welcome to take your student on a mentoring activity. You might be participating in a tutoring program that doesn't allow that, but I think typically you are allowed to see your student outside of tutoring. And we'll talk about mentoring in a slide coming up. We also ask our tutors not to miss more than 2 or 3 sessions a semester. Obviously, just logistically, it's sort of hard to cover tutors when they're absent, but more importantly, it's really to emphasize to the students that this is a consistent adult who's going to show up when they say they will. The worst thing you can do is just not show up and not tell the program manager. There have been so many nights this happens, and I see this student sitting there. I'm like, oh, don't worry. I'm sure they'll be here. I'm sure they'll be here. And it's just so sad to see them slowly realize you're not showing up. So please, whatever you do, just at least tell the site coordinator you can't make it, and they'll tell the student and then follow whatever process the program does. Don't ever leave the tutoring site with your student. That's something that's really important. Even if you are taking them on mentoring activities, you don't want to do it during the tutoring hour. That's sort of important to keep them in that academic setting during that time. And I promise if you do something fun with them once, they're going to want to do it every time. So you have to commit to just keeping the academic part academic unless it's, playing a little game to take a break or something fast. And then student expectations, again, this is for Northstar, but we have the same policy for attendance that we do with tutors. We ask students to not miss more than 2 or 3 sessions a semester. Sometimes, depending on the student, we will collect cell phones at the beginning of the session. Don't be afraid to ask the site coordinator to do this if the cell phone is distracting to your student. And again, let the site coordinator know if there are any behavioral problems, and they can definitely step in. So just really quickly, I wanted to talk about an IEP. I don't know if everyone is familiar with IEPs. They're individual education programs, and these are really just intended to support students with any issue. It could be ADD, ADHD, issues relating to learning English, hearing issues. So students with IEPs will probably have accommodations that they use in schools, and ideally you would use in tutoring. How will you know if your student has an IEP? You might not. On Northstar student applications, we ask parents if their student has an IEP. We don't always get an answer. If we do, we notify the tutor, and we'll try to kind of come up with the best way of accommodating that student's needs. You might not get that information, and you might suspect they have an IEP. Again, you could try to get connected to the parent. I mean, the teacher through the parent. There might be a case where they don't have an IEP, but you think they should have an IEP. That's also something you could talk about with the parent and the teacher. A lot of parents don't know about IEPs, or there's maybe some stigma around it. Sometimes there can be some embarrassment that their student needs some special accommodations. So maybe looping in the program coordinators could be really helpful to sort of start a dialogue between the parent, yourself, and the teacher to see if you can, find out if the student does need some special accommodations. What are some ways I should help a student with an IEP is to ask the school. They'll have the best way of helping your student. IEPs are really long and or at least to me, they're very complicated. So sitting down with one and trying to figure it out yourself would be almost impossible. So definitely the school, the teacher, school administrators all could give you advice on how to help your student. I'm gonna go with your mentoring. Hopefully your program also allows mentoring activities. Mentoring activities are really anything that takes place outside of tutoring. We definitely encourage Northstar tutors to take their students out at least once a month. It's a great way to form a connection with your student, to learn more about them, for them to learn more about you. It's really another way you can also sort of integrate into their families in some ways. We have families who, the tutor will go to the zoo with the whole family, or the tutor will go to the student's house for dinner sometimes. It's just a really good way of not only learning about your student, but sort of where they come from and having them bring you into their life a little bit more. Obviously, every place will have different guidelines for mentoring. At Northstar, we don't allow any overnight visits, so no camping or anything like that. We don't allow students to go to tutors' homes. Even if your program does allow that, I would encourage you not to. I think it's just a better idea to not have them in your own house, apartment, whatever it is. I don't think it's a great idea. But if you are going to their house and their parents are home, we always allow and encourage that. Otherwise, mentoring activities don't have to be educational in nature. We have pairs who go to baseball games or, like I said, the zoo or museum. Another way to sort of get into mentoring activities, if you're a little bit uncomfortable to start with, you can find another pair. Your student will probably have a friend or a sibling in the program. You can talk to their tutor and say, like, hey, why don't we all go bowling on Tuesday? It might be a little bit more comfortable than just you taking your student out alone. But another thing you can consider is joining, even if you are not a parent, joining some of the parent blogs. They're really good at posting different free activities in the area for kids. And it's just a really good way of kind of getting ideas. Sometimes it's hard to think, if you don't have kids specifically, it's hard to come up with ideas of what kids might like. So a lot of these blogs can be really helpful. I think one really important thing to remember is that it's not your job to decide if something is abuse or neglect. It's really the professional. You want to just report it. If something seems suspicious, you report it to child services and they will take it from there. It's not your responsibility to decide if this thing is happening or not, or if it's considered neglect or abuse.
Even
So
if
I
you
would,
think somebody else has reported it, it's
yeah,
still your responsibility to report.
I could be wrong, but because I think whoever gets the information has to be the one to report
To
it, right?
report it.
Yeah,
If
and staff can
right.
help do that, but you have to, if
So
someone,
it's kind of a domino effect. If the child comes to me and tells me, I have to report it, and then I'm going to tell my principal, and he has to report it. So everybody who has the information has to report it.
and you should check in to make sure that the program coordinators have actually reported it as well, because sometimes that doesn't happen. So, but yeah, the most important thing is to remember, you don't have to decide if it's abuse, neglect, any of these things. You just leave it to the professionals. It's anonymous. They won't know, the family won't know that you were the one that did it. And it's hard. Sometimes it's really hard to do. You might really like the parent. You might, there's all these things, but it's really important that you do it. Okay, last slide, tips from current tutors. Give your student choices. I think can be really helpful. Choices can mean, the order you do the homework in, the way you do the homework. For some reason, I have students who really love working backwards. It'll be a page of math problems and they just like doing it from bottom to top. Doesn't matter at all. Just let them do it. I think feeling like they're a little bit in control of their learning seems to be good for them. Name and celebrate what they're doing right. I think it's so easy, just even, the most well-intentioned tutor to just keep focusing on like correcting their mistakes. And, even if you're doing it gently, I think sometimes the message can just be like, oh, this person always thinks I'm doing the wrong thing. So just making sure you stop and celebrate what they're doing right. And that doesn't necessarily mean getting the right answer. It could just mean, wow, you're really taking your time tonight to do this, or you needed a break and you vocalized, you knew you needed a break and you told me. It doesn't have to just be, oh, you got the right answer. Let the student share what they know. You'll probably be working with students who are doing math in a totally different way than you learned. Sometimes it's great to just have the student teach you how to do the problem, even if it's something like double digit addition and you know how to do that, but there could be a way they're learning it in school. First of all, you want to always follow what the school is teaching and not the way you learned it. And also, I think it's just fun for students to be able to, they get a little boost from saying like, oh, I taught this adult how to add. And it can be another really good way of connecting with them. Explore topics that students might be interested in as much as possible. I think this is especially important with reading. If you can find appropriate level books that your student has an interest in, that's great. I think getting students interested in reading can sometimes be a struggle. So we try to do whatever we can to get their interest. So it's a comic book, if it's a book about basketball, anything, as long as it's on the right level, we'll definitely try to pursue that and give that to the student. Mini breaks. A lot of the kids like to have short breaks. You can even time it depending on the age of your student and your student's abilities. We've broken it down even as far as 5 minutes and 1 minute breaks. So 5 minutes of work, 1 minute of break. Obviously for older students, that doesn't really apply, but the really little kids, they've been in school all day. They've maybe come right from school. They're probably a little bit drained, and having these little breaks can be a big help. And then finally, being willing to change direction. This could be a couple different things. It could be changing the way you're teaching them. It could be changing topics totally. If they are really not feeling reading that day, we always tell our tutors, hey, it's fine to just focus on math for the day. I don't know how it would work with some school settings if they have homework, but if possible, try not to force it that night if you don't have to. Obviously, if you have a student that is refusing to do work for 5 sessions in a row, that's something you should talk to the program coordinator about, and maybe they can intervene and help out a little bit. But if you have a student who's normally really on task and they're just not feeling it that night, feel free to take a break or a longer break, or just switch to a different subject.
Thank you all. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and thank you
Okay. Thank you,
for
Tom.
helping us all make a better
you.
community.